Welcome to StaalX Construction and Steel Podcast. Episode 2, The Construction Contradiction. Data center booms while housing pulls back.
If you are looking at the construction sector right now, it honestly feels like we are tracking two entirely different economies running in parallel.
It really does.
On one side, you've got residential builders just paralyzed by extreme caution, cooling housing starts, builders kind of waiting for a sign. But then you flip the coin, and it's this unprecedented, almost frantic boom, driven entirely by the massive needs of AI data centers. Plus, that hopeful whisper that the Federal Reserve might finally be easing the throttle a bit.
It's a textbook study in market bifurcation, really. Our objective today is, to step back and see how these opposing forces are actually shaping the industry. We'll start by drilling into the August residential numbers, look at the contractor reaction to the Fed's latest move, and then follow the material chain, specifically looking at the just immense pull AI infrastructure is having on steel, which, as the latest StaalX market report outlines, is fundamentally changing the rules for suppliers.
Okay, let's unpack this unusual situation. We really have to start with the housing market, right? Because that's usually the pulse of the U.S. economy. And according to that August 2025 data, residential builders are definitely proceeding with extreme caution.
Yeah, extreme caution is the right phrase.
We're hearing buyer demand is low, labor issues are still there, and there's this sort of cloud of uncertainty around trade tariffs, too.
And that caution, it isn't just a talk, it's right there in the activity metrics. Residential construction slowed pretty much across the board in August. If you look at permits, and that's the key forward-looking indicator.
Right, that tells you what's coming.
Exactly. They were down 3.7% from July, and more strikingly, down 11.1% year-over-year compared to August 2024. Builders are simply not queuing up future projects like they were.
And the single-family segment, that's the core, isn't it? How did that look?
That showed the most pain, really. Single-family starts contracted significantly. We're talking an 11.7% drop compared to the prior year.
Wow. That's a severe pullback. Signals a real lack of confidence in near-term demand.
It is. Although the regional contrast tells an interesting story about where maybe some demand still exists, however niche. Only the West saw a monthly pickup in permitting. It rebounded about 9.5%.
Okay, so some life there.
Well, yes, but even that was largely led by multifamily projects, not single-family homes. Meanwhile, the South, which has been the growth engine for years, saw the largest annual decline in permits. A harsh drop, 15%.
15%? Ouch! So if everything's slowing down, is there any reason for a residential builder to be optimistic? Was there any bright spot at all?
The one, maybe paradox we saw was in completions.
Ah.
Builders are absolutely finishing the projects they already started. Completions actually grew by 8.4% month over month, and single-family completions specifically showed strength, up 5.6% year over year.
So the takeaway there is they're clearing out existing inventory, finishing what's on the books.
Right. They're de-risking. But by delaying future starts, they're effectively ensuring that supply will tighten, possibly dramatically, down the road if permits don't pick up soon.
That makes a lot of sense. Finish what you started before you commit to new ground. Okay, now, if residential is stalled by caution, what about the non-residential market? Did it get that psychological boost it seemed to need? I mean, that market struggled too. Spending slipped in July, it's trailing last year's level. But the Fed just cut rates, right? Wednesday afternoon.
That's right, 25 basis points. Announced September 17th. And that cut was supposed to be a bit of a shot in the arm for private funding. The reaction from contractors was, welcome, but very measured.
Measured how?
Well, Scott Lyons of DPR called it a meaningful confidence boost. He was hoping it might finally prompt some private developers to move forward on projects they'd shelved.
But I heard the general consensus was that one cut just wasn't really enough.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Lyons was careful. He said a single 25 basis point cut won't start the engine. He stressed that getting real deal momentum back would need a series of cuts.
Right, to really ease the pressure on borrowing costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Grieger Hassman from Adelson and Peterson, he basically agreed. Said it might help projects maybe right on the edge of being financially viable, but didn't see a big immediate market change coming.
So it sounds like the main benefit is maybe just psychological, feeling a bit better about things.
I think Robert Brown of GCM Contracting Solutions put it well. He noted rate cuts help at the margins, but they are not a magic switch. And I liked his point that sentiment and timing drive just as much as numbers on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It's about feeling secure enough to actually, take the plunge on a new project.
And that whole psychological discussion brings us right to the massive exception in the non-residential market, the one vertical that seems to operate on a completely different timeline, a different economy altogether, data center construction.
Yes.
That boom is just continuing completely unabated. It's effectively pulling the material supply chain along, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does, frankly.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the sheer scale of this AF infrastructure build-out, it's creating this disproportionate, honestly kind of shocking demand for materials. We're not talking about your typical office building needs here, are we?
Not even close. That's the core conflict we're seeing play out. When you look at the basic raw materials, especially steel, the numbers are just enormous. A standard AI data center, just a standard one, needs somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 tons of steel.
Which is already a pretty significant project in itself.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's just standard. What about the really big ones, the hyperscale centers?
Right. What are we talking about?
Those hyperscale centers, the gigantic complexes needed to train and run these huge AI models, they can require up to 20,000 tons of steel just for the structural support for one facility.
20,000 tons for one building.
Yeah. To put that in perspective, that 20,000 tons, that could be like the structural steel needed for maybe 20, even 30 mid-sized commercial office buildings.
Wow.
All demanded, all consumed by one single project, often all at once.
20,000 tons. That's just a staggering number, especially when you think there are over 500 of these hyperscale centers worldwide already, and that number is growing fast.
And this intensity of demand, that's what's creating the material bottleneck.
Yeah.
In fact, the demand for steel for these AI places, it's predicted to be just as great as the projected need for cement. We're seeing estimates, that AI data center construction will need around 1 million metric tons of cement by 2028.
1 million tons of cement.
So this AI boom is basically creating its own specialized parallel materials economy. It's focused entirely on these massive infrastructure projects, and it's setting a completely new baseline for material costs.
Okay, so this intense hyper-specific demand brings us straight to that tightrope walk you mentioned, the one described in the latest StaalX market report. You've got demand surging because of AI, but it's hitting this wall of plunging imports because of, aggressive trade policy.
Exactly. That trade policy crosswind, that's the key factor making the tightness so much worse right now. Remember, about 3 months ago, the U.S. government increased those Section 232 tariffs.
The national security ones, right?
Those are the ones. They jumped from 25% to 50% on most steel imports. And that had an immediate, really severe chilling effect on imports coming in.
What did that look like in hard numbers? Where did the imports dry up from?
Oh, they plummeted. Canada, for instance, usually a major wire rod supplier.
Yeah.
Their average monthly exports to the U.S. dropped from around 40,000 tons down to just 15,000 tons.
Wow, okay.
Mexico, a key source for rebar, their exports just collapsed. Less than 1,000 tons a month now.
Less than 1,000.
Yeah. And it's not just North America. Rebar imports from countries facing anti-dumping cases, think Egypt, Vietnam, Bulgaria, they fell off a cliff. Went from a 12-month average of maybe 76,000 tons down to only about 9,000 tons in September.
Good grief.
And wire rod imports saw a similar drop from a 95,000 ton average down to 22,000 tons.
That's just an absolute shock to the supply chain. So the domestic mills, they must be scrambling to fill that huge gap left by the tariffs, but they can't just ramp up overnight, can they?
No, they're trying, but they're definitely playing catch-up. We know Liberty Steel in Peoria, Illinois, they're ramping up production, getting towards 30,000, 35,000 tons a month, which is good progress, sure, but it's still short of their 50,000-ton capacity.
And nowhere near replacing all those lost imports.
Not even close. Yeah. And this whole imbalance is leading to a really fascinating split, a bifurcation in the steel market right now.
Okay, maybe quickly for listeners who aren't deep in steel procurement, what's the key difference between rebar and wire rod in construction, and why are the markets splitting like this?
Great question. So rebar, that's reinforcing bar. It's the thick, heavy structural steel you use to strengthen concrete, foundations, columns, walls, big structural stuff. Wire rod is smaller diameter. It's used more for things like mesh, fencing, nails, maybe less critical structural applications.
Got it.
So because the AI data center boom needs huge amounts of that heavy structural steel.
The rebar.
Exactly. The rebar market is extremely tight. Prices have climbed recently, even though scrap prices have been pretty stable. And word is another price hike might be coming soon.
That makes perfect sense. The AI demand is hitting that specific structural material disproportionately.
Precisely. But then you look at wire rod. Demand there is described as only lukewarm. Apparently, many buyers have enough inventory to last them into the first quarter of next year, so they aren't feeling the immediate squeeze, which is actually leading some of them to reduce their domestic orders right now.
That calm in the wire rod market sounds, I don't know, kind of misleading, especially if you look at the broader construction planning data coming out.
Oh, it is deeply misleading. That construction planning data has been surging in recent months. It points towards a strong 2026 construction year overall, driven by projects that aren't even breaking ground yet. So if that planned momentum suddenly hits, if those projects start demanding materials all at once, you could see a massive surge in demand across the board within months. And that scenario, that's a severe risk because those imports you'd normally rely on, they absolutely cannot save the day this time, not with those 50% tariffs in place.
So what does this all mean? It's like you've got a housing market frozen by uncertainty, non-residential is being propped up, really driven by one single sector, these AI data centers, and that niche, incredibly intense demand is creating these dramatic material bottlenecks, like in steel, which is then made even worse by global trade tariffs. It's a complicated picture.
It means you really can't view the construction sector as this single homogeneous thing anymore, just reacting uniformly to interest rates. That model might be broken or at least paused. The variables are moving in completely opposite directions. The Fed rate cut gives a marginal psychological boost, maybe helps a few projects at the edge. But that 20,000-ton steel requirement for one data center, that's setting a new, possibly unshakable floor for certain commodity prices, almost regardless of what the Fed does with a small basis point change.
That structural change, the one driven purely by technology demand, that really feels like the long-term story here. The AI boom is just rewriting the rules for construction materials economics.
It really is. And maybe here's a question for you to mull over. This massive, very specific and sudden demand for materials, driven by this tech shift AI infrastructure, it's fundamentally changing how we have to forecast long-term commodity prices. If demand for these hyperscale centers stays inelastic, meaning they will be built almost regardless of steel or cement prices, could the AI construction boom become a new permanent floor for structural material pricing? A floor that's totally immune to the traditional interest rate and housing cycles that used to govern everything in construction. That potential shift in economic fundamentals, that alone is worth watching very, very closely.
Thank you for listening. Explore more at www.staalx.com.